Good evening, listeners. Mind if I borrow your sense of balance for a moment? Picture yourself on a high floor, coffee warm in your hand, when the room begins to move. Not a sway, but a perfect, silent rotation. Would you step forward, or check whether the world outside has slipped instead? You're with Somnolent Conspiracies, where we trade comfortable answers for sharper questions and invite you to think along. Tonight's case rises over Marina Bay in a tower that made headlines for its engineering. Seismic bearings, sky gardens, and this was a stunt. One level designed to rotate for art installations and emergency sunshading tests. The mechanism hadn't been used in months. At 9 o'clock on a Tuesday, just as the financial district settled into its ritual of emails and lifts, Level 33 completed a full, flawless turn. No alarms, no warnings. 47 minutes later, someone found a venture capitalist face down on the same level's terrace. Throat cut, the teak slats rinsed too clean. Here's the part our bones don't like. Access logs said the floor never moved. Cameras showed columns where columns should be. The building management system signed off on a static day. And yet the view marks in the glass, tiny anti-bird decals, proved that everything had revolved exactly once at the moment the blood stopped. We're going to pry up floor panels, read torque signatures the developer hoped no one would ever ask for, and decide whether the building moved to hide a killer or whether someone used motion most of us ignore, tide, traffic, wind, to make the murder look like architecture. Keep your feet under you. When the horizon turns, it pays to know who had a finger on the switch. Part 1, the circle and the body. The elevator to level 33 was lined in pale glass that reflected Natalie Chen's face like an apparition. She watched her own jaw set as the floor numbers rose in a muffled tick. 28, 29, 30. Then the doors sighed open onto a sky corridor with a view that tried very hard to be a religion. Marina Bay lay in a sheet of hammered silver. Small boats left creases like handwriting. Below, the financial district was a grid of confidence. Above, Helix Tower made its quiet promises in steel and air. Two uniformed officers flanked the vestibule into the level 33 sky ring. Their shoulders were too square, their silence a little too curated. First responders waiting to be relieved by certainty. A building guard, the older kind with a spine of habit, stood wringing his cap in his hands. "Detective Chen?" the senior officer asked. "CID," she said. "Natalie." She flashed the badge. "Walk me in." They moved through the vestibule into the ring. The space had the odd, expensive blankness of a gallery between shows. A circular terrace ran like a track around an interior lounge, the glass balustrade offering a pristine, limb-weakening view. Wind tapped the glass very gently, with the cotton glove touch of a stagehand. The body lay face down near the southern arc, where the terrace pushed outward over the bay as if trying to hear it better. A man in a white shirt and slate trousers, shoes too slim for reality. Blood had spread in an oval darkening the teak slats and then broken into washed, pale fingers as if someone had persuaded it to forget what it was. "Victim is Damien Coe," the officer said. "Venture capital, 41. Found by a cleaner at 9:47. Time of death. Initial estimate, 9:01 to 9:06. Me will firm it up." Natalie took the scene in as if it were speaking a language she used to know. The way threads of rinse water had dragged through the stain. The way droplets had laid themselves in arcs. A faint radial spray pattern presented itself if you let your eyes unfocus. A series of delicate spokes, all widening as they reached toward the bay. She knelt. Up close the teak told a different story. A tight grain, good maintenance, and a thin line of salt at the edge of one slat where water had pooled and cooked off. Not the municipal mains. Bay water wore a filigree when it dried. Someone had rinsed this deck with the sea. "Who washed the terrace?" she asked. The guard shuffled his feet. "Ma'am, the cleaner. She says she just saw it wet. No hose in her cart. The automatic rinse system for spills is disconnected on this level." So the deck was washed before she arrived. Natalie looked at the guard. "Name? Kamal. Building security. Tell me what happened at 9. Kamal swallowed. "You'll think I'm foolish, but we all felt it slightly. Not a sway. A glide. Like when the MRT starts to move, but slower. I looked at the monitors. Nothing on building management. No alarms. No motor start. The ring, it's designed to rotate, but only in test, only with permits. Today, the BMS shows static. Natalie rose and walked to the glass. You felt a rotation. He nodded, eyes eager for permission. Like a lazy turn. If I closed my eyes, I would have sworn the world was being slid past me. And yet your system says it didn't happen. She looked outward, not at the bay but at the skyline, at the immovable punctuation marks of architecture. The spire of a hotel, the notch of a museum roof, the triple stack of an office tower. On the glass of the balustrade were small black silhouettes of swallows, anti-bird decals to keep the living from breaking their necks on clarity. A chalk dot sat just beside one of those birds, discreet and human. Another dot, further along. She followed them and felt a private click of recognition. Who chalked the dots? She asked. The junior officer cleared his throat. Staff on the breakfast shift. One is an expat barista. He chalked against the skyline at 8:30 so he could find a glare-free spot again after the coffee rush. Someone said the dots lined up again at 9. Lined up again, Natalie repeated, as if the view had traveled and come home. Ma'am, it doesn't make sense, Kamal said quickly. The ring hasn't rotated in months. Good, Natalie said. Then the bearings will have plenty to say. She moved back to the body. The forensic team had done their first pass without touching much. Damien's left arm was no longer communicating with his right. The fingers lay in an open question. Natalie studied the throat wound. A clean slice, narrow, unforgiving. A blade that liked straight lines more than showmanship. A box cutter would do it, if wielded by someone who had rehearsed the angle in their mind. She crouched and let her gaze slip over his shirt cuff. A whisper of dark. Not blood. Something like graphite, but not. Moly grease often shined like that, slick and slightly metallic. On a terrace that sometimes rotated, molybdenum disulfide had jobs, reducing load friction in drive assemblies, smiling to itself under pressure. She filed it away. Where exactly did your cleaner find him? She asked. Here, the senior officer said, tapping the air. We marked the initial position. No sign of dragging. Natalie stepped back to where the rinse tails began to lose their memory. The arcs, faint as punctuation in fog, were curved not as if thrown from a fixed platform, but as if their landing pad had been turning gently beneath them. It was a peculiar geometry. She felt it in her inner ear more than in her eyes. If you dropped blood on a rotating world, the curved spatter would whisper it. She pivoted to the inner ring. A series of column sleeves and expansion joints, neat in their luxury, allowing a structure to breathe. The skins around the columns lit up in her mind as interrogations waiting to happen. A ring that moved would have to confess it somewhere. A new smudge, a heat bloom, an abrasion where steel remembered stress. What about cameras? She asked. Kamal grimaced. The lens facing the bay shows these glare pulses. Every 40 seconds, the sun hits just right and we get a white-out flare. The others, hall side, are clear. And the building management system shows what? Static, he said, shame in the syllables. If there had been a rotation, the BMS would log it, the drive motors would register torque, and alarms would, well, they would sing. Natalie turned the cap of the scene in her head and listened. The terrace was trying to be ordinary. It was not succeeding. The chalk dots, the decals, the arcs pointing bayward as if impulses sought the sea. The whisper of moly on a cuff. All of it suggested choreography. A floor had moved. A man had died on it. One tried to hide the other, or the other had provided the cover. She looked down the long, clean curve of the ring to the maintenance door. A small brass plate read, Rotation Drive Access. Authorized personnel only. The letters had the wear of touches that had meant nothing until they meant everything. Seal the level, she said. No one in or out without my say. I want power isolation to the rotation drive immediately, full lockout tagout. Pull the fuses and keep them in your pocket, Sergeant. The senior officer nodded, grateful for instructions with edges. He began to talk into his shoulder mic. the clipped cadence of order proposing itself to chaos. "And get me facilities," Natalie added. "Whoever speaks fluent motor." "Engineer Wei Tan is on site," Kamal said quickly. "He's the one who always tells us not to worry." "Good. Let's make him worry a little." She walked the circumference once, slow, the way you walk a maze you think you've already solved. At each column, she paused to photograph the joint sleeves, the rubber expansion rings, the anchor points. She took wide shots and then mean little close-ups. A thin smear of something at the base of one column sleeve. A hairline of brass where there should have been none. A faint thumb-shaped opacity on the emergency stop cover near a hidden panel. She held her phone still and counted to 2 between frames, letting her pulse settle into the act of seeing. At the North Arc, where the view cut clean across the bay to the tide clock sculpture, an array of mirrored fins that flashed meaning at boats and tourists, Natalie faced the glass. One of the black swallow decals was clawed with a small silvery line. No, not clawed. Aligned against something, then misaligned, then aligned again. The chalk dot beside it was dead simple, almost childlike, almost defiant. "Did anyone report the floor moving before 9? She asked without turning. Kamal shook his head. "Only at 9, ma'am." The feeling. The coffee machine rattled a little, someone said. But the cups stayed where they were. Cups do that on ships, she thought. The horizon moves and the cup insists on believing in the table. How long would a human stand on a slowly rotating ring before they decided the world outside had blinked? She stepped back to Damien. A small strand of hair, his or a stranger's, had glued itself to his wrist with diluted blood. Beneath a thumbnail, something clear had lodged, a shred of film or tape. She did not touch it. She let it be a promise. "Photograph, collect, seal," she told the forensic lead. "Pay particular attention to that thumbnail. And bag the drain basket in the terrace channel. I want whatever it caught." The forensic tech nodded and slid into the practiced ballet of extraction. "Detective," the senior officer said, one hand to his earpiece. "Facilities says the rotation drive cabinet for level 33 has a local isolation point inside the maintenance hatch. They ask if we want them to power down at the main or at the level." "At the main," Natalie said. "Then at the level. Then I want the cabinet opened in my presence. Until then, nobody breathes near it." She stood for a moment with the bay shaking light into her eyes and listened to her own instructions echo back through radios and corridors. The ring felt like it was waiting to be asked the right question. Kamal cleared his throat. "Ma'am, may I ask, do you think the floor moved?" Natalie looked at him and considered the economy of truth. "I think," she said, "that if it did, it complained. Bearings don't suffer in silence. We'll go listen to them." She took one last look at the chalk dot and the small black bird poised forever in a gesture of not quite flight. It had made a full circle, someone said, and returned to where it started, as if nothing had happened. That was the trick with circles. They encouraged you to forgive. "Let's find out who asked the room to dance," she said, and turned toward the maintenance hatch. Part 2, Bearings, Drives, and Lies. Wei Tan met her outside the maintenance hatch with the politeness of a man who had been defending expensive secrets all morning. He had the kind of calm that passes for competence in a crisis. Soft voice, careful hands, graphite smudges that did not belong to an office. His badge hung from a lanyard that said Helix Tower Engineering in tiny letters, as if embarrassed to brag. "You wanted main power down as well as local," he said, leading her along the service spine to a gray cabinet-stenciled rotation drive, L33. A pair of uniformed officers stood guard with the reverence people reserved for things that could cook you if you breathed wrong. "I want the motors so dead they doubt resurrection," Natalie said. "You isolated at the main?" He nodded. "Mechanical floor. I can show you the breaker log. This cabinet is cold. Still, we treat everything as if it's waiting to surprise us." "Open it," she said. He used 2 keys and a practice tug. The cabinet door swung back to reveal 3 inverters arranged like sober choir boys, each wired to a drive motor that lived beneath their feet. LED status bars slept. Labels read M1, M2, M3. The cable harnesses were tied with professional pride until you looked too close. Natalie took in the faint additional shine on a tie, the way one bundle fed into a small junction box that did not match the others. A suspicion floated up like a fish. 24 bogies on the ring? She asked, keeping her voice casual. Yes, Wei said. 24 assemblies with load wheels and radial bearings. The drive motors engage a central ring gear through reduction. It's an elegant system, overkill for art. And the control? He tapped a lower compartment. PLC with safety interlocks, limit switches, hardwired e-stop loop. The BMS supervises, at least it's supposed to. Supposed to, she echoed. Good word. He glanced at her then, a little rueful. Buildings are like people, detective. They have what they tell you about themselves and what they actually do. She put on nitrile gloves. Let's listen to what this one does. They descended a short ladder into the annulus, the narrow service ring between the static core and the rotating floor. It was like stepping backstage at a theater mid-show. Quiet, tense, full of ropes and wheels that insisted on calling themselves something else. The bogies sat every 15 degrees around the circle. Squat boxy beasts with their bearing housings and grease points and the soft sheen of money. Natalie clipped her torch to a belt loop and crouched at bogey 3. The grease nipple wore a crescent of fresh moly, dark gray, glittering where the torch found it. It didn't belong to last quarter's maintenance. It had the promise of last night. Someone loved this one recently, she said. Wei's mouth twisted. We do love them, but yes, fresh. Bogey 7 told the same story, a little overgreased, as if the person at the gun had wanted to feel helpful. At bogey 12, a smear had picked up a skin of dust. Less recent, maybe, the ring had its own calendar. What's your grease schedule? She asked. Monthly checks, quarterly service, Wei said. We switched to moly 6 months ago on recommendation. Lower where under startup loads. She moved on, letting her eyes be greedy. At encoder A, an optical disc that counted rotations with little flashes of conviction. A brass glitter winked on the concrete below. She bent and teased it into her palm with a gloved fingertip. A crescent of shaving, thin as a lie. She didn't speak right away. She followed the cable from the encoder to its junction and saw where the insulation tape had been lifted and replaced. Not sloppily, just enough. Do you mind if I look inside the encoder housing? She asked. Wei hesitated. The encoder was calibrated. Engineers are like violinists around such things. I'll do it, he said, which meant he wanted to see it first. He unsnapped the cover. Natalie angled the torch. A second brass shaving clung to a smear of clear residue near the mounting bracket. The disc itself looked unmarred, but the reed head's tiny bracket wore a freshly brightened edge, as if a tool had kissed it by accident. You've got brass where you shouldn't, she said softly. Somebody torqued a fitting or shaved a spacer or, more to the point, open this up for a reason. Wei exhaled. If you introduce jitter to the encoder, the PLC thinks the world is steady, even if it moves or vice versa. It depends how you spoof it. That depends, she said, on who benefits from lying to the building management system. They made their way to the PLC cabinet. The upper section was neat. A Siemens rack with modules labeled with the cheerful linearity of factory mines. The lower panel, behind a faceplate that didn't sit quite flush, told another story. When Wei levered it off, Natalie saw a small extra device patched to the backplane with a personality it tried to hide. A third-party interface, a can bridge the spec did not list. Its LED was dark now, innocently. Shadow PLC? She said. Wei's cheeks colored. It's not ours. Not in the commission manual. Cables fed the interloper and then snaked through a narrow hole into the wall space. Natalie traced them with her light, through a notch someone had dremeled smooth, up behind acoustic paneling, on toward the public face of level 33. Who has been in here apart from facilities? She asked. We have contractors, he said, unhappy. For the art installations. For the proposed kinetic events. Proposed kinetic events, she repeated. Good phrase. She took photos, the bridge, the notch, the way the cable ties here were the cheap clear kind you buy by the handful. She popped an access grommet and peered. Just behind the decorative panel, tucked like a rabbit's foot, lay a small U-shaped device with a USB tongue. A loopback dongle, the humble criminal of data layers. She reached for an evidence bag. This would make your PLC hear itself and think it's hearing the encoder, she murmured. Or it would make BMS hear a bedtime story. Wei didn't answer. He was staring at the emergency stop loop. The mushroom head e-stop in the maintenance bay wore its guard like a halo. Clear film hugged its edges with such love that at first you didn't see it. But once you saw, you couldn't unsee. Tape drawn taut to keep the button depressed or undepressed at someone's pleasure. Natalie stepped close and let her light run along the seam. A thin liquid had dragged along the lower lip and then dried. She leaned in but did not sniff. Citrus had a way of announcing itself, old janitor's wisdom. Solvent to take off adhesives without leaving the sin behind. Remove a tape, remove fingerprints, she said. Unless you're in a hurry and leave a ghost of lemon. Wei swallowed. Who would? Who would tape an emergency stop? Someone who wanted to stop the stopping, she said. Or to keep it off, while they did something the building would object to. He nodded. Eyes narrowed now, not in disagreement, but in the beginning of anger. Engineers felt betrayal in wires the way cops felt it in statements. Logs, she said. Show me what the inverters believe. Back at the main cabinet, Wei connected a laptop. The 3-drive inverters woke reluctantly to a diagnostic mode and let their memories unfold. He scrolled as if reading a confession he had not anticipated. There, he said. Power history. Look, at 8:59 something pulls current on a non-reported channel. A maintenance port we use when we test under isolation. It begins to draw torque. Not much, but enough to move the ring under no load. It lasts 9 minutes. Ends 9:08. Natalie stood very still. And none of this bubbled up to BMS? Wei clicked through another screen. The supervisory layer is C mirroring the primary PLC, not the maintenance interface. If someone rerouted status, the BMS would serenely see nothing while the drives did their little dance. How does the BMS feel about that? She asked dryly. It feels, he said, like a child asleep with headphones on. Natalie kept her voice gentle. Who has credentials for the maintenance port? Facilities, he said. Me. 2 of my techs. 1 contractor in the past under supervision for a trial run. Security does not. At least not officially. Does security have access to your cabinets? Only with us. Usually. He hesitated. Their head Rafi has asked for read-only access. We never gave it to him on the maintenance side. Usually, she repeated. She let silence ask the rest. He hunched, thinking. We're supposed to log every panel opening. The hinges, he said suddenly. Here. He ran his finger along a hinge pin and came away with a gray smear, then frowned and tried again at a different cabinet that definitely hadn't been opened today. That finger came away clean. Someone oiled this with moly, he said, surprised. We don't grease hinges with moly. No, Natalie said, but someone with moly on their hands might not distinguish which metal gets the blessing. She photographed the smear. Tell me about your reprimand logs, she said, as if asking after weather. Anyone recently in trouble for running tests after hours? Wei's face closed and then opened again. Arun, he said at last. Arun Malik, facilities manager. He's enthusiastic. He wants the ring alive again. We cautioned him. The rotation feature is disused for a reason. It's expensive to insure, and the city is jumpy about moving platforms after. He stopped himself in time. Everyone had a list of after events they didn't say in buildings. We'll talk to Arun, Natalie said. She stared at the inverter logs again. The gentle swell of torque, like a heartbeat someone had drawn by hand. 9 minutes would be enough to turn the level through a full circle at a pleasant crawl. Enough to pull the sun in and out of cameras in obedient pulses. Enough to let someone rinse blood and then turn the floor back to its place as if it had never been elsewhere. And this, she said, tapping the maintenance trace. Never went upstairs to the record that legal believes. Wei shook his head. It would look like a static day. The alarms would sleep. If the emergency stop loop was taped, he gestured at the air, helpless and furious. I would not have believed it if I wasn't looking at it. Natalie closed her notebook and felt the ring under her feet as a hypothesis. A human had told it to move while another human bled. The ring had obeyed. The record had been coached to deny it. The denial had little brassy shavings beneath it and citrus on its lips. She replaced her glove, flexed her fingers, and turned for the ladder. Thank you, Mr. Tan, she said. You've made me a liar's map. Now I just have to put names on the corners. Detective, he said as she climbed. Whoever did this knew both our language and yours. She paused one rung from the top. Good, she said. Then they'll understand me when I knock. Back on the terrace, the bay threw fragments of light up against the glass like fish trying to tell a story. Natalie looked at the chalk dot again, at the small black swallow, at the polite body under the white sheet, now ready to go. Sergeant, she said, put Arun Malik, security lead Rafi Halim, kinetic artist Jody Lim, VC partner Felix Ong, and feng shui consultant Mei Yeo on my list. All of them had reasons to make the room turn, and one of them had a blade. She held up the bagged loopback dongle, its plastic wings catching the sun. Someone rerouted the truth behind the paneling. Find me everything else that doesn't belong. She glanced once more at the maintenance hatch. Its face was blank, its hinges almost too clean. She imagined a thumb pressing clear tape along an e-stop cover, the way you might hold a mouth shut. If the floor turned, she said, half to the ring and half to herself. The bearings talked. We have their gossip. Next we talk to the people who made them sing. Part 3, The Circle of People. By late afternoon, the suspects arrived in pulses, as if the tower were breathing them in. Natalie used a meeting room on level 32 with a glass wall that looked down into the sky ring below. She didn't mind the view. It reminded people they were very slightly transparent. A pot of coffee sat between 2 tumblers of water, symmetrical as a test. Arun Malik came first, beaten to breathless tidiness by years of escalations and apologies. He was in his 30s, hair clipped close, a keyring heavy enough to anchor a skiff. He carried a tool tote he refused to surrender, as if a wrench could argue his case better than his mouth. You've been told why you're here, Natalie said. He nodded. Level 33, Damien Coe. He swallowed. I'm sorry. Tell me about your relationship with the rotation feature. Arun's expression lifted despite himself. It's beautiful. The ring is overbuilt, smooth under load, no chatter when we temp cycle. We get this city of the future thing and then we mothball it. The bearings hate sitting. They want to turn. And yet you were reprimanded for after-hours tests. Color burned his cheekbones. I didn't move level 33 without permit. I did a quarter turn last quarter, level 12, after midnight to check for a rumble. It was documented. His eyes flicked to the glass wall, to the silent ring below. If someone moved 33 this morning, they did it via maintenance port and lied to the BMS. Show me your hands, she said. He looked startled, then held them out. The crescents under his nails were honest. Dark, fine-grained, a technician's signature. Moly grease, he offered, defensive. We switched compound half a year ago. The old lithium soap wasn't cutting startup wear. Do you know a contractor named JL? Jody Lim. He half smiled. She's not a contractor. She's an artist with a budget. She wanted me to reactivate the ring for an installation. Mirrors and... Look, I said no. Officially. Unofficially, I may have shown her where the PLC lives. Not to touch. He heard himself and winced. We share an elevator bank, detective. People ask. Did you install any non-spec interfaces? Third-party bridges? Loopbacks? His face recommitted to innocence. No, ma'am. Natalie let silence salt the air. He shifted, the tool tote knocking his chair. Keys clinked. A shop bell. Finally, he couldn't help himself. I saw a cheap cable tie behind the acoustic panel once. he blurted. Clear nylon, not our black UV-rated stock. Cut it. 2 days later, there was another. I wrote a note to myself to check the wall. Then we got a chill water leak on 17 and I forgot. Names, Natalie said. Security has the master openers for the acoustic panels. Rafi's people. He hesitated. And Jody's crew did a site walk last week. Where were you at 9 o'clock? In the generator room, starting a load test. I can get you logs. Do. When she let him go to sweat in the hall, Jody was already framed in the doorway as if she had chosen the light. She wore a black jumpsuit that had opinions and a camera strapped across her chest like a tame animal. Move and the city rearranges itself, she said, gesturing at the ring below. It's the oldest trick. Even babies do it. You want me to confess to trying to make level 33 dance, detective? Fine. I tried. I filed proposals. The lawyers stroked their beards. Did you get access to the PLC? I got a tour. She smiled cleverly. With a chaperone who thinks he's impervious to flattery. What you're looking for is an implementation detail, not an artist's foolishness. Did I code anything? But I didn't. Not on your precious ring. Natalie flipped a plastic evidence bag onto the table. Inside, the loopback dongle looked unimportant. Seen one of these? Everyone's seen one of those, Jody said. It's the paperclip of bad IT. What do you want me to say? That art wants a spin? Art always wants a spin. That doesn't make me a murderer. What did Damien think of your work? Damien liked to pretend he could buy physics, she said, the smile falling away. He wanted to sponsor a performance dinner, ring rotating slowly while the skyline did tricks for his guests. I told him his guests would become dizzy and generous. He laughed. He stopped laughing when I said the safety permits alone would eat his dessert budget. Where were you at 9? Filming the bay from the promenade. She tapped her camera. SD card is yours. You'll see glare rippling across your cameras every 40 seconds. The tide clock throws a sun slice like a blade. I've been scouting that behavior for months. Your initials are JL, Natalie said. Congratulations, Jody said sweetly. So are 1,000 other people's. If your shadow PLC says Helix 33/JL, maybe your saboteur has never been to art school and thinks signatures are still a thing. Do you know Felix Ong? Natalie asked. Jody's mouth flattened. I know he thinks a rotating room makes him a visionary. Did you know he owns a unit on level 33? Of course, she said, amused. Everyone who matters on this level tells you which view is theirs. Like it's a personality. Natalie let her go. The room breathed once, and Felix walked in with his confidence on a leash. He was handsome in the way that consultancies help engineer. Haircut that forgot to be a risk, shoes that said they preferred carpets. He glanced at the ring below, at the spot where the body had been, and his expression tried to perform gravity and failed. My partner is dead, he announced. Damien was a hard man. He collected enemies like watches. I'm devastated. You argued with him this morning, Natalie said. Felix blinked, then smiled as if she had said weather. We discussed loudly. That's venture. It was about a financing decision. Normal. You own a unit on 33. You know the internal stair. It's private, he said quickly. No cameras. You'd like that. Everyone likes that. He realized the sentence and moved on. Am I a suspect? That's a real question, detective. I was on 35 alone for a while, taking a call. The lift logs will show I swiped at 57. I did not see Damien again after 8:54. I had no idea. You have a sailing scar on your left thumb, Natalie said, casual, as if discussing hobbies. Felix looked down as if the digit were introducing itself for the first time. I race on weekends. We all have scars. It's a hobby that writes on you. Do you fix your own bikes? She asked. What does that have to do with anything? You get moly grease on a balcony rail fixing a chain. It tends to shine in the right light. He sat back, the smile turned off now. Are you trying to provoke me, detective? I'm trying to see how quickly you learn new languages, she said. This building speaks torque. Your friend spoke blood. You speak money. I'm teaching all three to get along. Felix's jaw worked. Damien was not my friend, he said finally. He was a partner. There's a difference. Where were you at 9? She repeated. I told you, he said. On 35. On a call. I can get you records. You do that, she said. He stood as if the chair had burned him and left a scent of cologne that tried very hard to be invisible. Mei Yeo arrived carrying a notebook bound in red cloth. She was in her 50s, hair in a black knot pinned by something that might have been a lacquered twig or the tidy suggestion of a blade. She sat without waiting to be asked, placed the notebook in the center of the table as if it could hold the room still. You are the feng shui consultant, Natalie said. Mei inclined her head. I advise people who think shape and direction make them safe. They are not wrong. You recommended rotation for level 33. I recommended alignment, Mei said. This tower cuts the dragon line that runs from the bay through the city's old mouth. It's unwise to pin a circle and hope it behaves. Circles want to move. If you refuse them, they move when you are looking elsewhere. Natalie studied her. Did you ask the building to turn this morning? Mei's mouth lifted at one corner. If I could ask a building to move at my pleasure, detective, I would not charge by invoice. You're unpaid, Natalie said, reading the note in the file. Buildings kill bills, Mei said. People kill each other. Where were you at 9? In the prayer room of the mall across the street, she answered. I was not praying. I was waiting to be paid. Do you know Damien? He wanted the circle to move for him, Mei said. He did not believe it could move against him. Do you know security lead Rafi Halim? Everyone knows Rafi, she said. He is a man who keeps doors loyal. Rafi came last, carrying his fatigue like a permit. He was wiry, eyes doing quick arithmetic across the space. His uniform shirt had the press of someone who thought appearances were half the job, and the other half was reassigning blame to machinery. Detective, he said with a nod. He took the chair that faced the door. Security people did that as reflex. Your cameras show glare pulses every 40 seconds, Natalie said. You didn't compensate. I've been asking for filters for a year, he said. Procurement moves like coral. We adjusted exposure where we could. We still get wideouts when the tide clock does its disco. You manage access to the maintenance panels? With facilities. He held up his hands. I don't have their keys. We coordinate. Do you run a maintenance VPN from your phone? He didn't flinch, which is its own flinch. I have credentials to look at occupancy and lift status. Read only. For evacuations. Read only, she repeated. Do your people open acoustic panels? When facilities asks, he said. We're not cowboys. Where were you at 9? In the control room, he said. Watching static because your engineer's precious BMS said everything was quiet. We felt the glide same as everyone. I called facilities. They told me their screen said no movement. We both looked bad. Who looked good? She asked. Rafi's smile was thin. Whoever made the room turn without asking the room's owners. She let him sit in the question and then dismissed him. The glass wall held the ring as if in a petri dish. The chalk dot glowed faintly below like a small moon of stubbornness. Natalie wrote the names in a column and gave each a sentence. Arun, nose drives, loves the ring, reprimanded, grease under nails, saw cheap ties, guilty of curiosity, maybe more. Jody, wants a live rotation, scouts glare, initials in the wrong place, clever enough to know what not to touch. Felix, money and motive. Unit on 33, stare familiarity. Scar on left thumb, cologne and denial. Learns languages quickly. Mei, unpaid advice. Rituals of movement. Believes circles misbehave when ignored. Timing unknown. Rafi, cameras and panels. VPN habits. Read only that could become right if you twist hard enough. She capped her pen. Outside the glass, the harbor inhaled and exhaled light. The feeling that the room might begin to move was already in her muscles. like a learned superstition. Everyone wanted the floor to move, for art, money, face, or spite. One of them had made it move at the hour a vein opened. The circle was crowded. The trick, as always, would be to see who was standing still when the world spun. Everyone wanted the floor to move, for art, money, face, or spite. Part for time as a circle. The morgue gave her numbers with the calm of a metronome. The medical examiner, a woman who wore her hair in a no-nonsense coil and her conclusions in even lines, slid the preliminary sheet across. Post-mortem interval puts time of death between 9:01 and 9:06, she said. Lividity and temperature agree. The cut is single pass, left to right across the anterior neck, depth consistent with a narrow, rigid blade box cutter class. Minimal hesitation. The hand knew where it wanted to go. Angle, from slightly behind the victim's right to left front. You can read that as either a left-handed assailant facing the back right of the victim, or a right-handed assailant working across the body from behind. I'll refine when I finish mapping microabrasions. Natalie nodded. Transfer. Trace of something like molybdenum disulfide on the right cuff. Not common on terraces. Common on certain maintenance hands. Thank you, Natalie said. Numbers and their patience. She took the sheet back upstairs to the room where movement thought it could pass for stillness. Helix Tower's lift logs were less patient, but they were obedient. They told her lids open times in a grid of digits that felt like habit pretending to be innocence. She sat with securities analyst, a young woman named Hannah who treated data like a skittish animal. Here, Hannah said, tapping the screen. 854, Damien Co. badges in ground. Rides to 33 with 2 other occupants. Doors open 8 hours 56 minutes and 12 seconds. Felix Ong badges 8 hours 57 minutes and 1 second, but goes to 35. Doors open 8 hours 57 minutes and 38 seconds. And then, he doesn't badge again until 9:14 down to 32. There's stare activity on the internal sensors between 8:58 and 9:03, but no camera coverage inside the stairwell itself. Stair sensors. Magnetic switches picking door cycles. 35 to 34 at 8 hours 58 minutes and 11 seconds. 34 to 33 at 8 hours 58 minutes and 34 seconds. Then nothing until 9 hours 3 minutes and 10 seconds. 33 to 34. After 9 hours 3 minutes and 40 seconds, back to 3:05. So someone came down to 33 just before 9, Natalie said, and left just after 3 minutes passed. Could be anyone with stair access, Hannah said carefully. But the only badge in that window on 35 is Felix's. Natalie watched the digits line up like soldiers. The window 9:01 to 9:06, nested inside the stairway's whisper. Enough time for a single cut, a rinse, and a room that turned like a page. She returned to level 33's terrace with a kit and a patience that made other people fidget. The day had gone a few degrees warmer. The bay clock's mirrored fins sent broken light across the glass in neat intervals that might have been mocking or might have been simply the truth. The terrace drain ran in a discreet channel along the glass. Maintenance had had the sense to leave the catch baskets in situ after bagging the first. She asked for the second. When she lifted it, the mesh held small wet confetti. Slivers of teak, not dust but bodies in miniature, each with a face where a blade had ended a cut. She teased 3 into a vial and let their edges catch the light. Fresh cuts had a look in wood, a shine before air taught them dignity. These shone. Under the microscope later, she would see the story in their grain. Something sharp had raked them into being within an hour of a man's blood losing its argument with gravity. Bag the whole basket, she told the tech, and log any salts on the filter. The first one gave us bay water, the tech said. We'll see if this one sings the same tune. Under the planter by the southern arc, where the body had lain, she found the squeegee. Not the squat commercial kind in housekeeping's cart with its brand stamped like an advertisement. This had a narrower head and a handle wrapped in black athletic tape, the sort you used to make something with edges behave with wet hands. A film of something clear sat on the rubber blade's lip, so even and so thin that you only saw it when the sun pushed at it sideways. Natalie bagged it without comment. Evidence didn't like applause. Nearby, The planter's rim told a story in fingerprints of dust interrupted by fingers that had thought themselves too light to matter. She took the prints and let the dust have its say on powder. Back inside, the CCTV suite bled rectangles of time. She asked for the level 33 terrace feeds, all angles, from 8:50 to 9:15. She set the wall to a 4x4 grid and learned the rhythm of a machine that wasn't hers. At 8 hours 59 minutes and 48 seconds, the lens facing south went white. Not a sensor blowout, not a power drop. A clean, flaring blade of reflection that walked across the frame and then resolved to view again by 8 hours 60 minutes and 10 seconds to 9 hours and 10 seconds. Hannah corrected herself with a smile. 40 seconds later, it happened again. The tide clock had found its alignment. A sun slice bouncing off a mirrored fin onto a lens 33 stories up. A coincidence you could schedule if you cared to. She watched the sequence for 5 full cycles. The pulses fell like breathing. Flare, view, flare, view. Each mask long enough to swallow a body's small drama if you positioned it with care. Natalie slowed the frames around the first pulse just after 9. In the instant before the flare climbed to obliterate the south camera, a figure crossed the far edge of the terrace, head down as if calculating rather than hiding. The flare swallowed them, and when the view returned 22 seconds later, the figure was gone. The east-facing lens caught only the aftertaste. A shadow leaning out of and then back into the internal stair door, the quick shoulder of someone who liked narrow windows. "Can you stabilize this?" she asked. Hannah tried, but light is a riot. "The glare is a hard mask," she said. "We can show you the rhythm, but not the face. We can align the pulses to the tide clock's reflectance model. The city has one for tourist apps. We can tell you when the next blade will sweep." "Do that," Natalie said, "and overlay the maintenance log from the drive. I want to see if the torque swell rides the flare cycle or fights it." The overlay made a nice lie look like a blueprint. The inverter's maintenance port showed the torque rise at 8 hours 59 minutes and 58 seconds, a curve like a hill someone meant to climb slowly. The glare took the south lens at 9 hours and 10 seconds, 9 hours and 50 seconds, 9 hours 1 minute and 30 seconds, regular as a choir. Between the flares, view returned in windows of 20 to 25 seconds. The torque stayed gentle, consistent, enough to turn the ring at roughly 0.7 revolutions per minute. A complete circle would take about 1 hour and 25 minutes at that speed. But you didn't need the full circle to get the moves you wanted. You needed the pulses. Whoever set the speed wasn't showing off, Natalie said. They were tuning to a metronome. Hannah pulled up the lift stair overlay. Internal stair door opens to 33 at 8 hours 58 minutes and 34 seconds, she said. Closes 8 hours 58 minutes and 37 seconds. Opens again to 33 at 9 hours 3 minutes and 10 seconds. Closes 9 hours 3 minutes and 12 seconds. That's our window. Natalie ran the loop again with one hand on the desk, the way you do when you want your body to believe in the physics on the screen. At 9 hours 1 minute and 5 seconds, the south camera was flaring. At 9 hours 1 minute and 27 seconds, view returned. The teak nearest the southern arc shone in a way that meant something had been pulled across it in that 22 seconds. Not a mop, a blade pushing water. The pattern radiated subtly toward the bay, the way a rotating substrate biases a rinse. She stepped out to the terrace again and set a forensic laser level along the glass to mark a reference against the skyline. The chalk dot sat there as if it had been waiting for someone with a laser to bring the conversation back to first principles. "If you rotate exactly 360 degrees, she murmured to the dot, "you can pretend you didn't move. The universe loves a loop." The tech called to her from the drain channel. "We've got a different salt profile here," he said. "Bay water like the first, but with a little detergent, and a polymer signature I'd call from a film adhesive." "The e-stop tape," Natalie said. "Or the blade tape. Or both," the tech said. She moved to the internal stair door. Its push bar had been wiped, but the narrow slot that housed the bar's hinge held a thin grime no wipe could reach. In it, a clear filament glinted. She plucked it gently with tweezers and laid it on a card. Transparent, stretchy, with the stubborn memory of a film pulled taut and then torn. Inside the stair, The air smelled like metal and soap. There was an economy to the landing, just enough space for a man and his intent. She measured the distance from the door to the terrace's sightline and to the nearest camera. 20 steps to be out of frame, 10 to be in it. A person who knew the rhythm could choreograph it without thinking very hard. A left hand could hold the tape, a right could hold the blade, or the reverse if you liked your puzzles clean. Back in the meeting room, she drew a circle on the whiteboard and marked the flare times like cardinal points. She put the stair door at east, the body at south, the maintenance hatch at northwest. She drew windows where a careful person could move unseen, and gaps where they would have to trust luck. Then she wrote 901 to 906 inside the circle and shaded it like a small weather map. She called the forensic lab and had them rush the film residue from under Damien's thumbnail, the squeegee slip, and the e-stop seam. "I want the adhesives compared," she said. "If we're lucky." Someone bought tape in a hurry and didn't consider that glues have dialects. In the evening light, the bay clock flashed and dimmed, a patient pendulum. Natalie watched it once and felt the odd sympathy of seeing a mechanism keep its promises while a person did not. She gathered her notes. The day's shape was becoming a clock with too many hands. But the important ones were behaving. Time of death hugged the torque swell. The glare pulses framed a stage. The drain spoke of fresh cuts, and bay water pushed across teak in arcs that only happen when the ground politely slides under your feet. The squeegee did not belong to housekeeping. The film on its edge wanted to rhyme with the film under a dead man's nail. She circled the name Felix once, not because the proof was done, but because the geometry liked him. He had reason and route. He knew the stair and had an apartment door that understood his key. He knew the glare because he liked to perform in front of windows. He would know about the tide clock if he had spent any time being rich near the water. A left thumb scar was just a flourish. But she circled Rafi, too, because the loopback needed a friend inside the logs, and she underlined a rune for telling the truth late and loving machines too much. She put a neat square around Jody and MEI. Their motives were to move a circle for meaning and myth, not for blood. Motives had a way of changing under stress, but engineering rarely lies about who touched it. She capped her pen, looked once more through the glass at the ring that tried not to fidget, and said to Hannah, "Set up a full telemetry test at 1900. I want all of them present for a safety debrief. We'll rotate under our hand, cancel the glare with reflectors, and see who loses their rhythm when the metronome goes silent." Hannah nodded, almost smiling. "Trial rotation. Trial rotation," Natalie echoed. "If the killer choreographed a moving room and light for cover, take away one piece and they'll stumble. We'll watch for the stumble." Rotation created timed blind spots. The killer worked between glare sweeps. "Now make the room move on our terms and watch who tries to keep the lie alive." Part 5, Blood That Doesn't Run Right. The lab loved clean puzzles. Natalie brought them a mess and asked it to sing. She stood behind the glass at forensics while the bloodstain pattern analyst, a precise woman named Ko, no relation to the dead man, she added without being asked, diagrammed the terrace like a clock face. On a large monitor, Damien's blood refused to behave like the textbooks. That was the point. Ordinarily, Ko said, tapping at a fan of cast-off dots. On a static surface, you'd expect linear radiating spatter, predictable parabolas, gravity's prim grammar. Here, the microarcs are subtly curled in a common direction. It's as if the substrate moved under the droplets in a constant, gentle yaw. "Quantify gentle," Natalie said. Ko zoomed. She overlaid a model, thin vectors dancing like polite minnows. "Given droplet size distribution and impact angles from the stain edges, we can infer an angular velocity of roughly 0.7 revolutions per minute. Very slow. Enough to bias the landings, but not to fling anything." 0.7, Natalie repeated. "Our drive logs say the same." Ko's mouth quirked. "Blood tattles. Show me the rinse pattern." The image shifted to reveal the deck after its hurried baptism. The teak had been washed, but with snitches, too. In the pores, in the summer growth rings, in the microvalleys between hard and soft grain, residues lingered. "We took swabs from 3 radial segments," Ko said. All show sodium and magnesium in ratios consistent with bay water, not municipal, and trace detergents. An anionic surfactant with a profile like commercial dish soap. Someone used the nearest water feature, not a janitor's station, and they added soap. Natalie pictured the fountain on the underside of the sky ring, the pretty trough that recycled bay water through a filter for visiting hands. The fountain is the closest source, she said. Or a bucket left by housekeeping, Co allowed. But the polymer traces say something else. She brought up a spectral graph. Peaks like a skyline. This is a styrene, isoprene, styrene block copolymer, common in clear packing tapes and certain invisible films. You get microfleck transfer when you pull it off a surface under strain, especially if your finger oils and a citrus solvent interact. We found these flecks in the drain basket and on the squeegee slip. Same tape as the emergency stop? Natalie asked. Co pursed her lips. We're still running a direct adhesive-to-adhesive comparison, same base chemistry, but the ratios of tackifiers vary by brand. We lifted a sliver from under your victim's left thumbnail. She nodded at a tray where a small clear filament lay like a hair of glass. If the polymer blend matches within tolerance to the e-stop tape seam and your squeegee residue, we can say with some confidence the same role played all three parts. And under Damien's nail means what it always means. He grabbed someone's taped hand, Co said, or someone taping. The filament is stretched, torn at an angle. A thumbnail is a knife when a frightened man uses it. Natalie let that live beside the image of the e-stop. Clear film hugging the guard with a lemon-smelling arrogance. Thumbprints mean thumbs. Thumbs mean handedness. Handedness was already playing on a different chalkboard. The cut, she said. Co tapped a separate set of photos. A neck is an anatomy map with consequences. This one had been traversed once, decisively. Single narrow blade, rigid, around 11 to 13 millimeters edge exposure if we're talking standard box cutter. Entry high right anterior, traversal leftward and slightly downward. Depth and clean margins say a fresh blade with minimal chatter. Hesitation? None. The assailant knew or the adrenaline made certainty. Either way, efficient. She rotated a 3D model. There's a feature here, microscoring on the wound edge, that suggests a blade with a barely notched section, maybe from a previous contact with something hard. Not enough to tear. Just enough to leave a whisper. Natalie thought of a box cutter dragged across a painted balcony rail, picking up a burr, or a blade used to slice tape off a plastic housing around an encoder, or to cut nylon ties behind acoustic panels. A knife tells on itself when you let it. Transfer on the cuff? She prompted. Molybdenum disulfide, Co confirmed. Trace on the right shirt cuff. Not the kind of thing you get from leaning on glass. You get it by touching a treated metal surface or a person who has touched one recently. It fluoresces under the right excitation. Yours did. She slid a UV image forward. The cuff glowed softly like a night map. On the terrace, near the maintenance hatch, the hinge pin showed moly smears, Natalie said. Our engineer swears no one uses moly on hinges. And yet, Co said, her finger hovered above the UV image. And yet Damien did. They moved from monitors to microscopes. In a petri dish, the teak slivers from the drain lay like shipwrecks. Under magnification, they showed the crisp geometry of a clean cut. No tear out in the early wood, neat compression in the late wood. The blade edge meeting the grain like a negotiator. Moisture content measurements from the slivers red high, consistent with cutting just prior to a rinse. He cut the fresh layer, Natalie murmured, then squeegeed the wash across a deck that was turning by a whisper. The arcs remember. Co showed her a time-lapse of the squeegee blade under a scanning scope. On its edge, too perfect to be innocent, a film residue lay in a continuous line, interrupted only where someone's finger had lifted it to peel and check. A smear of sweat salts, sodium, potassium, rode the handle under the athletic tape. The lab would send the DNA to a machine and the machine would gossip back. The sweat profile suggests a single dominant user, Co said. Handle wear is heavier on the left side, callus pressure points there. A left-handed grip would explain it. Natalie made a small mark in her notebook. Left-hand dominance? It didn't convict. It added a weight to a scale that was already tipping. "What about the filament under the stair push bar?" she asked. "Same polymer family," Ko said. "We'll put the adhesive blend under the mass spec and tell you if it's the same roll." Manufacturers make choices, antioxidants, plasticizers, that let us speak in probabilities. If we get lucky, the blend will be as distinctive as cologne. "And the lemon?" "D-limonene residues present," Ko said. "Citrus solvent. The kind sold as adhesive remover or a natural degreaser. Nice smell. Leaves a chemical hello on stainless if you don't buff it out." Natalie pictured a hand wiping an e-stop seam with a paper towel wet with lemon. Rushed work. The kind you do when you think light will keep you invisible and the room will do your misdirection. She kept her face still. Back in her car, she let the city move around her while the evidence arranged itself. Blood that curved with motion. Teak that remembered a blade in its pores. Bay water and dish soap, not janitorial supply. Moly on a cuff that didn't know what it had brushed. A narrow, decisive cut by a blade that had lived other lives. Clear film under a dead man's thumbnail, stretched in desperation. In the evening, she went back to level 33 with a small kit and no entourage. The terrace had cooled. The harbor was a field of coins. She kneeled by the maintenance hatch and held a UV torch against the seam of the e-stop guard. In that frequency, the world shows you what it thought it had hidden. A thin halo glowed at the lower edge. A ghost of tape, maybe the sweep of a thumb. She didn't touch it. She only memorized the geometry of a left hand pressing down and around to get a clean seal. Your brain knew what your body would do. Hers took notes. At the balustrade, she held the UV to the glass where the chalk dot sat near the swallow decal. Low, faint fingerprints bloomed and died under the beam. Too smudged to sequence. Enough to prove the world had been touched by someone who wanted markers to align. She measured the dot's relationship to the skyline. Had it echo the angle of the tide clock's blade at 9 o'clock. Everything was a metronome if you asked in the right units. She tried the internal stair door with gloved hands. It opened on the same breath of metal and soap. On the inside, just above the bar, where fingers land when you wait listening for footsteps, a single partial satin powder she'd laid earlier. Left thumb, distal ridge flow flattened by an old triangular scar. She took it like a blessing, bagged the tape, and wrote in her notebook without breathing hard. By the time she returned to the lab, Ko had a preliminary on the adhesive comparison. The e-stop seam, the squeegee edge, the filament from under the nail, she said, laying 3 chromatograms side by side. All share a tackifier ratio consistent with 2 known consumer brands. One is imported widely, one is common to a local chain. The citrus solvent residue on the e-stop and squeegee heads matches a particular formulation used by that local chain's house brand remover. The blend includes a tiny amount of methyl salicylate as a scent stabilizer. That's our luck. Someone bought the tape and remover together, Natalie said. Likely, Ko said. Not certainly. It's enough to knock on the right door, Natalie said. She called Hannah. Pull purchasing histories where you can. The local chain by Helix, see who on our list has a membership card. Cross against timestamps from last night to this morning. On it, Hannah said. And Detective Security dropped a copy of the trial rotation briefing you asked us to set for 1900. All 5 confirmed attendance. Rafi wants to review safety signage. Good, Natalie said. Let him. Before the test, she took a last walk around the ring alone, feeling the echo of motion in her bones like the phantom sway you get after a day on a ferry. She put her palm against the acoustic panel where the cheap clear ties had once sat. Behind it, the loopback dongle had ridden serene and sure, telling the supervisory layer bedtime stories while the drives hummed their secular prayer. The key-bee, the uncanny, was not a ghost. It was a choreography. Light and tide and torque and a man's belief in his own timing. The building was innocent of fortune-telling. It had been told to turn, and it had obeyed. What remained was the human part. A thumb with a scar pressing tape, a blade rehearsed on rails, a rinse carried by a squeegee along arcs that remembered a whisper of spin. She wrote one last line on her pad. He grabbed at a hand that had just taped the e-stop. then below it smaller. Who was near the panel when the lie began? Part 6, the panel and the ghost operator. The maintenance hatch opened like a withheld word. Natalie had it unscrewed under controlled isolation, with Wei Tan present and a forensic tech whose hands treated dust like testimony. Behind the acoustic paneling, Level 33's clean lines surrendered to the ad hoc. A braided cable wormed through a dremeled notch. A third party can bridge taped into position with the lazy confidence of someone who believed in their own neatness. A micro PLC the size of a paperback bolted on standoffs that didn't match the manufacturer's finish. Real engineering is choosy. This installation had the slightly off rhetoric of a forged signature. Shadow PLC, Wei said low. It's riding the CAN bus between the main PLC and the inverter network. If you spoof the encoder message frames here, BMS never sees the maintenance channel wake up. Forensic images, all sides, Natalie said. The tech did the dance. Oblique light, scale, card. She took in the thread of clear tape still hugging a bundle, the plastic tie that was unmistakably cheap, cloudy where proper ones run coal black. That detail had brought her here. Now the rest could speak. Wei jacked a read-only adapter into the Shadow PLC's service port. The screen on his laptop bloomed with a stingy interface. Fields called what they were by someone who liked to be literal. Configuration, he murmured. There's a scheduler routine here. He opened a control block. The comments were in plain English, not the laconic comments of a contractor hiding contempt, but not corporate either. Amateur confident.
Sched-basso rotate-basso 33.
Asterisk rotate underscore degrees. 360. Asterisk speed underscore RPM. 0.70. Asterisk start underscore 9 hours. Asterisk if present. Badge underscore ID in whitelist within 10 minutes prior. Asterisk log underscore O. Main underscore only. Asterisk supervisor underscore feed. Look back. Whitelist. Natalie asked. Wei clicked. For entries popped up. Hashed but annotated by human vanity. D.KOH. Hash F2C1. F.ONG. Hash 19A7. J.LIM. Hash 88D9. M.YEO. Hash 0B32. Presence means what? Natalie said. Caught by which antenna? Wei scrolled. They're scraping the level's local readers, lift arrival, access points to the internal stair, terrace door sensor. If any two on the whitelist ping within 10 minutes of start, the routine arms. It sits listening to the maintenance port for 9 hours and then steps the inverters. The building moves if two names show up, Natalie said, and the movement only writes to the maintenance side. The BMS is sent to bed with a story. She felt the neat, ugly economy of its slot perfectly into the morning's shape. Whoever wrote this wanted witnesses or a specific pairing. Wei pointed to a line that tried to be discreet and failed. Author underscore tag equals Helix 33/JL. It sat in the code like a monogram on a handkerchief. Jody Lim, he ventured. Or someone who wants us to think so, Natalie said. Jody likes light and permission, not invisible interfaces. Still, print the code block and hash the firmware. We'll need provenance. She had the tech dust the micro PLC's enclosure screws. People think anodized black doesn't tell. It does, if you let light be impolite. On the bottom right screw, a half-moon of pale dust sat inside the hex socket, disturbed by a tool with a chipped edge. The chip left a nick print. Tiny, asymmetric, a fingerprint for a wrench. Document that, Natalie said. Wei, who maintains tiny hex fasteners on level 33? Everyone with a toolkit, he said. But we inventory bits. Engineers are superstitious. We keep our sets as matched families. Then let's see the families, she said. Facility's tool crib was a hymn to order, which made the discord sing louder. She asked for Arun Malik's roll personally, took it to a steel table, and laid his 3mm Allen keys under a hand lens. The second favorite, the one people use when their favorite is out on a job, had a burr on the short arm, a tiny triangle missing at the edge. She placed it in the screw head of a test plate and saw the same half-moon gouge print emerge. She photographed it, then fit the key into the bag screw from the Shadow PLC. The burr seated like a key in a tiny wound. Arun stood in the doorway with his guilt and his pride trying to decide whose turn it was to speak. Tools are shared, he said before she asked anything. We rotate sets. Anyone could have. Your role is signed out on your badge from midnight Sunday to this morning, Natalie said. You're the only one who likes that brand of stubby driver. I'm not asking if you ever open the hatch, Mr. Malik. I'm asking who asked you to. He stared at the table, then at Wei, then at the distance like it owed him a better answer. When he looked back, his mouth had chosen honesty and his shoulders had chosen trouble. Jody, he said. She talked about art like it was a form of maintenance. She said the city had built a beautiful machine and then starved it of meaning. She called it kinesis deprivation. She said she needed the ring alive to prove a point about attention. I told her the BMS was a pit of permits and no one would sign. She said, what if the ring thinks it's alone? What if you just talk to the motors directly? It was a bad joke that kept being a joke. You installed the bridge, Natalie said. Not a question. I installed a bridge, he hedged. I told myself it was for diagnostics, a private sandbox to test bearings under rotational stress without waking legal. I looped the supervisor to itself so it would stay quiet. I was going to pull it out after the gallery pitch died. He shook his head. I was stupid. Did you write this scheduler? He glanced at Wei's laptop. The routine glowed like a dare. No, he said. Honest the way a man is when lying would require a different talent set. I can read it. It's not my style. It's too theatrical. Who knew about the shadow panel? Me, he said. Wei suspected. Jody knew I'd done something. Security. Rafi. Saw me open the hatch once and asked if we were back in motion. I told him no, and he rolled his eyes and said, if you cowboys are going to play, at least don't wake my boards. He's jaded. He knows systems lie all the time. Did you tape down an emergency stop? Natalie asked mildly. Arun looked stung. No, I don't tape safety. Did you move level 33 at 9 o'clock? She said. He held her gaze. No. Did you tell anyone exactly how to do it? Silence made a small, clean sound. I explained how a maintenance port sees encoder frames, he said, and how, if you loop the supervisor, the BMS would keep dreaming. I was bragging. It felt like saying a clever curse in a foreign language. You pretend it's not a thing that can hurt anyone. Natalie let his answer live. It was credible. It was damning. It did not smell of blood. He loved the ring. He liked machines that came when called. Murder required a different hunger. She sent Arun to a chair and called up security. Rafi came with a practiced frown and an eagerness he tried to cage. You've been around a few hacks, Natalie said. Everything gets hacked, Rafi said. If you build a ladder, someone climbs it from the wrong side. You ever climb this one? She tapped the laptop where the scheduler glared with its monogram. He shrugged. I've seen shadows on networks. You learn to look away if no one gets hurt, because the day you report it, it becomes your problem forever. If you want me to say I knew someone was whispering to the motors, no. If you want me to say I wasn't surprised, also no. Do you recognize the author tag? JL, he said. Jody's initials. Or anyone's. Have you ever used a maintenance VPN from your phone to toggle anything that isn't in your job description? Natalie asked pleasantly. Rafi's eyes didn't move. Read only, he said. I'm not a cowboy. You keep saying that word, Natalie said. It keeps not meaning what you think. She dismissed him and called Jody. The artist arrived with a storm in her step, saw the code on the screen, and laughed once, short, almost admiring. I wish I had written that, she said. It's neat. Your initials, Natalie said. JL could be Jesus, or Jack London, or just looking. Come on. Did you ask Arun to install a private bridge? I asked if the ring could learn to breathe again, she said. He's the kind of man who wants to say yes to a living thing. Did you write this scheduler? She looked genuinely offended. Detective, I make moving pictures with light. Not with torque. I wouldn't risk a rotating floor without permits. People vomit. Safety people yell. It's a whole thing. Who would write this and sign it with your initials? Natalie asked. The kind of person who thinks a signature is a spell, Jody said dryly. Or the kind who wants you to waste time arguing with a woman who has better things to do than your alibi. Natalie turned to the machine again. The whitelist gnawed at her. For names. Damien, whose blood convinced easily. Felix, who knew the stare. Jody, who liked circles to move for art. May, who believed circles move when ignored. A social geometry disguised as logic. Can the routine be set to arm on badge pings that aren't actual badges? She asked Wei. NFC echoes? Clones? Wei frowned. If you feed the reader a credible hash from the right antenna, the presence check won't care about the body attached. But that's not my layer. Later, Natalie said. For now, I want the routine dead. I want the bridge bagged. I want a list of every panel opened in the last week. And we're not tearing the whole theater down yet. She sent the forensic tech to lift trace from the micro PLC's SD slot and the service port skin sheds in the oddest places. Inside the hatch, just under the lip where a palm braces when you lean in to read, powder pulled up a neat partial. Left thumb, a healed triangular scar interrupting the distal ridge. She felt her mouth move into something that wasn't a smile. Same scar as the stair push bar, she said. The panel has a ghost operator. By dusk, she had the adhesive comparison back. The e-stop seam, the squeegee lip, and the filament from under Damien's nail sang almost the same chemistry, like 3 verses of a mean song. Hannah's purchasing pull added a harmony. One of the local chain stores had sold a roll of clear film tape and a citrus remover at $7.42. Loyalty app pinged to a number tied to a Felix-adjacent holding company. It wasn't a name, it was a path. Natalie stood again at the glass, the city turning its light like a coin. The room did not move, and yet her bones remembered. The code in her head had a rhythm. 9 o'clock. 0.70 revolutions per minute. 2 present. Maintenance only. Loop the supervisor. Give the cameras a sunblind to clinch the trick. Trial rotation stays on, she told Hannah. 1900. Full telemetry on both the maintenance port and the supervisory layer. We'll add reflectors against the glare. We change one variable and ask the choreography to trip. And the guest list? Hannah asked. All 5, Natalie said. I want to see who drifts toward the hatch when the ring wakes. I want to see who tries to toggle the loopback when the glare goes away. I want to see who can't stand a machine telling the truth. She looked once more at the monogram in the code and felt the contempt behind it. A flourish by someone who mistook cleverness for immunity. Set a trap, she said, almost to herself. If the floor moved to hide a blade, tonight it moves to find one. Script points toward insiders. Initials muddy the water. Next step. Make the room turn on our terms and watch who can't help touching the lie. Part 7, Trial Rotation. They called it a safety debrief because building's like a euphemism. At 1840, the suspects arrived in 1s and 2s, wearing their reasons like coats they couldn't take off. The bay held the day's last light. Hannah's team had already wheeled in 2 collapsible reflector panels and leaned them like white sails against the rail to kill the south camera's glare. If the killer's metronome had been the sun, tonight they would break the tempo. Wei stood by the maintenance hatch with the sober ceremony of a man about to wake a patient. He'd hard-isolated the main breakers, run test pigtails, jumped the supervisory layer to a read-through monitor, and set a redundant logger on the maintenance port. Full telemetry, he said to Natalie, quiet. The BMS watches this time. No bedtime stories. Good, Natalie said. Let the truth chatter. She'd asked each of them to come to walk through safety deviations and signage in the aftermath of the morning's incident. It was the kind of phrase people obey. Rafi came first, uniform immaculate, the calm of an aquarium guard around sharks he calls by name. He wandered close to the hatch, hands in pockets, eyes doing circuits. His phone woke and slept like a heartbeat. May drifted to the drain channel, as if all answers eventually moved toward water. She watched the terrace with the privacy of a prayer, fingertips on the planter's rim as if reading grain. Jody arrived with her camera and a grin that refused to apologize for existing. "You've folded out the glare," she said, admiring the reflectors. "Lovely cheating." Arun hugged a squeegee as though it were a rosary. Just the handle, no blade fitted. Natalie had insisted. He kept glancing at the hatch the way a parent glances at a sleeping child, expecting to hear a cough. Felix was last, breath high, jacket sharp enough to cut an alibi. He took in the reflectors, the taped placards, the neat coil of caution taped by the hatch, and smiled in a way that trusted witnesses. "Ground rules," Natalie said, her voice straight into the room. "We rotate under isolation for 3 minutes only. No one touches anything. I repeat, no one touches anything. Way will hold e-stop authority. BMS and maintenance port are both logging. Doors to the internal stair remain locked during the test." Felix's head tilted at that. "Locked?" he said, light. "Locked," Natalie said. Hannah lifted a hand from the control tablet. "Ready," she said. "Bring it up," Natalie said. The inverters woke with a barely audible conversation, fans whispering like polite gossip. On the supervisory screen, motor current plotted a soft hill. On the maintenance logger, a second hill rose in agreement. 0.70 revolutions per minute, Weymouth, and his eyes said, "See, it doesn't have to lie." The ring began to move. It was the kind of motion your skin registers before your eyes consent. A drift, a slide, a suggestion in your bones that the room had decided to breathe. The skyline slid a millimeter along the glass. The chalk dot lost and then regained its place against a swallow decal. Even standing still, people adjusted, knees gazed the angle of a shoulder to a rail. Rafi circled near the hatch, as if keeping it safe by proximity. His phone lit, locked, lit, locked. On the logger, a small blip appeared. A handshake from a device that wanted to see but insisted it was only looking. Hannah arched an eyebrow. Natalie didn't speak. May's attention stayed with the drain. "Water remembers," she murmured, not to anyone in particular, and then turned her head, listening to something the metal said to the evening. Jody held her camera level and let the world glide through her square. "It's almost tender at this speed," she said. "People confess at this speed." At minute 2, Felix wandered toward the internal stair door with a rumpled impatience. He tugged at the handle without thinking, found it locked, pivoted with the gracelessness of a man caught trying a private shortcut in a public space. His smile came late. He walked a tight little circle, then drifted back toward the reflector panels as if they'd invited him. On the maintenance logger, lines writhed. "We have an attempted loopback toggle," Hannah said, eyes narrow. "Maintenance channel ping from a device. Mac maps to security's MDM. Device class mobile." Rafi's phone slept. "Something wrong?" he asked, not quite looking at anyone. The hatch's e-stop guard wore a fresh tamper strip. The strip was very slightly fingerprinted by dust a glove couldn't move. Natalie could have named the thumb without turning her head. "Stay where you are," she said mildly, and pointed to the lens for the south camera. In the monitor grid, the frames held steady. The reflectors turned the tide clock's sunblade into a harmless smear. No flare, no mask. The 40-second rhythm had been exiled. In that pulled-back honesty, small motions stood out like admissions. Rafi took one half-step toward the hatch. His shoulder dipped, the tiny body language of a man about to be useful. "Don't," Natalie said, and heard in her own tone that she'd said it before, to other men at other doors. He smiled, a fraction late. "Just checking the tamper," he said. "Professionally paranoid." "Paranoia is when you imagine a loopback," Hannah said without looking away from the tablet. "This one exists." Arun cleared his throat. "If you wanted to fake stationary," he said half to himself, "you'd kill the encoder feed back its last value, and let the drives pull on maintenance. The supervisory layer would hum lullabies, the alarms would nap. It's easy." "Too easy," Jody said, and panned from Felix to Rafi to the hatch. Someone brought a metronome. "I'm filming a confession in centimeters." In the third minute, Natalie gave way a nod. He tapped e-stop. The motion went to 0 with the courtesy of a bow. On both logs, current fell away in agreement. No lies. The room remembered stillness without flinching. "Thank you," Natalie said, and let the ring rest. Then she turned to Rafi. "Your device attempted to toggle a loopback on the encoder feed. Why?" He spread his hands. "Diagnostics. Habit. Seeing if the interface still lies," Natalie said. "It does. You helped it lie this morning." He took the offense route. "Are we doing this now? In front of them?" "In front of the ring," Natalie said. "You can keep your answers for a statement if you prefer. Your VPN's handshake went live at 1858 in this room. It's the same signature that touched the maintenance port at 8:59. His jaw worked. "I never touched the blade," he said, which was 2 steps ahead of the question. "I thought it was a demo. Engineers think they own the truth. PR owns the panic. I tried to keep the panic from having data to climb. By erasing the movement," Natalie said, "you made the room complicit." May watched him with a compassion that didn't soften anything. "When you hide a circle," she said, "it moves anyway, but it moves through people." Felix looked from Rafi to Natalie, reading a calculus he couldn't solve by expense. He stuck his hands in his pockets to keep them from announcing themselves. On the inside of his left pocket, Natalie imagined, a roll of clear film had once lived for an hour. Or she was imagining it because the story wanted symmetry. Either way, his left thumb worried the seam of that pocket now, finding an old triangular scar as if to remind itself it existed. "Enough for tonight," Natalie said, letting the throttle down on her voice. "We have logs that didn't used to exist, and an absence of glare that clarifies who needs cover. We're not done." She dismissed them and watched how they left. Jody folded the camera to her chest like a cat and left without apology. Arun handed the squeegee to Wei and touched the hatch with something like guilt and something like grief. May paused at the drain, as if saying goodbye to a witness. Rafi said nothing and took an extra-long look at the panels that were no longer lying for him. Felix hovered, then hit the stair door again as if locks changed their minds for the right kind of man. When the room was empty, Wei exhaled the way engineers exhale after holding their breath in case steel has learned to surprise them. "He touched the loopback," he said. "You saw it." "I saw him want the absence," Natalie said. "People tell you what they think truth is by which logs they prefer." She picked up the bagged loopback dongle from the evidence tray and held it against the light. Its plastic wings glowed like toys. "Tomorrow," she said, "we stop the story that the room tells itself. Tonight was for watching hands. Tomorrow is for asking why one of those hands carried a blade." The decoy run stripped away the glare. Security tried to keep the lie alive. Facilities hovered. Felix searched for his private route. The room turned without cover, and someone still reached for the loopback. Part 8: The Blade and the Debt. Money is a polite word until it runs out. Then it becomes a blade. Hannah's pull on Felix's world came back thick and orderly. Filings, board notes, calendar holds that had been renamed strategy sessions to avoid saying triage. She laid the printouts on the table like slices. "Felix's fund is a house with 2 walls missing," she said. 2 LPs stalled redemptions. Damien was scheduled to invoke a keyman clause at 9:30. Documents drafted at midnight and signed in his drafts folder. If filed, Felix is out. Voting rights suspended pending review. Natalie read the email chain. Damien had the chill brevity of a man tidying up a partnership he regretted. Midnight timestamps, a scalpel laid out on a tray. Felix's replies were curiously absent. A draft sat unsent, where all the loudest things live. "What about access to 33? Natalie asked. Hannah tapped a map. Felix's unit opens into the ring at the northeast arc. His internal stair fob unlocks the 35 to 33 run. He's used that stair 12 times in the past 3 weeks. Comfort with the cut-through. Wei's knock interrupted. He stood in the doorway with a cardboard evidence box from Felix's apartment. "Search warrant paid dividends," he said. Inside, a box cutter in a tray by the kitchen sink, handle clean, blade channel faintly smutty. A blister pack for replacement blades with one cavity empty. Tape rolls clear. Invisible finish 2/3 gone. A citrus remover bottle with its cheerful promise of no residue. And a scent that belonged in kitchens rather than on emergency stops. On a balustrade cloth folded under the sink, a dark grease print had bled into the fibers like a secret pressed too hard. Natalie gloved up and lifted the box cutter, tilted it to let the microscope catch the edge. Under magnification, the current blade showed no notch new since morning. In the blister pack's empty cell, adhesive dust clung where the factory seal had been disturbed. The handle's inner screw wore a smear that went black under oil and silver under light. Molly, if she had to bet her ear. We lifted Molly from his balcony rail, Wei said. He fixes a bike there. The rag under the sink carries the same. If he changed a blade after 9 and wiped the channel, the rag would take the confession. Ko's lab moved quick on small truths. Within an hour, she had the rag smear under a scope next to Damien's cuff image. Same fluorescence profile, she said. Moly disulfide, plus trace graphite from a dry lube additive. Your rag knew your cuff at a distance. Natalie turned the box cutter in her hand. A tool without personality, unless you were the person giving it one. We'll swab the handle for sweat salts, she said. He'll have an explanation. I open packages. We'll let the blade channel talk. Shoes next. Felix's loafers, their arrogance scuffed by the ordinary. The outsoles held teak dust that still wanted to be wood. The salts in the grooves spoke of the bay, not the building's mains. Housekeeping doesn't carry the bay into hallways. Men who rinse a terrace with a nearby fountain do. Hannah's map of the morning now included a neighbor in 35 and E. A man who had the gift of being home during business hours and the vice of listening. He's a remote language tutor, she said. At 8:59, he paused a lesson because voices were carrying from the stairwell vent. A male voice, sign or you're out. He recognized Damien's voice, says he'd heard it before in the lift. The other voice was lower, calmer, said something he couldn't make out. Then the student asked him a grammar question and he forgot to listen. Natalie knocked on the neighbor's door anyway, because ears remember more in rooms. The tutor, a tidy man with a headset around his neck, reenacted the moment with apologetic accuracy. He pointed at the vent that travels voices like gossip from 35 to 34 to 33. He remembered the rhythm of feet. 2 down, 1 back up, 2 down again. He remembered because human bodies love patterns when they think they're not loving them. Back at security, she stood in the stair landing and measured the echo. She had Hannah step the descent while she recorded the sound on her phone. The cadence matched the tutor's count. Someone stopped on 34 just long enough to think, then went on. Felix practices the stair, Hannah said. If you asked him to blindfold walk it, he could. His alibi relies on the glare, Natalie said. A metronome of light that swallowed cameras in 40-second breaths. She looked down into the ring. The reflectors from the trial still leaned like patient sails. Without the sunblade, the cameras told the time in smaller, less forgiving units. Rafi had not wandered near the hatch since she'd told him not to. Proximity is a language too. She could read his new distance as easily as his earlier drift. She cold-called Felix. We need to talk, she said. Bring your phone. He came with a lawyer's name on his tongue, but no lawyer, because men like Felix believe they can still explain a problem if they move enough air at it. He took the chair, placed his phone face down, as if that were a kind of prayer. Your box cutter, she said, laying the tray photo on the table. 1 blade missing this morning, replaced by a fresh one by afternoon. The channel wiped with a cloth that also knows moly. Your balcony rag. Your rail. Damien's cuff. I fix things, he said, too quick. I open deliveries. You buy citrus remover and invisible tape at 742 from the chain under the tower, she said, sliding the receipt. A loyalty app screenshot Hannah had coaxed from a database that didn't know it cared about murder. You used the same remover on the e-stop seam and the same tape to hold it where you wanted. Damien has a filament of it under his thumbnail. He grabbed your hand while you were taping, or while you were cutting the tape you just used to keep the stop compliant. He opened his mouth and then closed it around the wrong sentence. I didn't plan. Stop diagnosing your own soul, Natalie said, not unkindly. Tell me about 9 o'clock. He sat back as if the chair had moved without him. His eyes did the small animal calculation. What can be admitted without opening the whole door? Damien was going to fire me, he said finally. Not just demote. Kill my vote. Push me out with a transition. The term sheet he drafted would make me a ghost. It's a control game. He always liked control. So you oversaw logistics, Natalie said. You set a room to move. I didn't touch any motors, he said, seizing on a technicality like a life buoy. I understood that the floor could rotate without alarms if the maintenance port was, engaged. Everyone talks. Arun is a child. Rafi thinks a log exists only when he lets it. You primed the rotation with a scheduler you didn't write, she said. But you understood. And you understood the glare your artist friends talk about the tide clock like weather. You tuned your morning to meet the sun. He shook his head hard, as if he could replace the picture in the room with the one in his head. I asked Damien to step out to the terrace, to talk. He didn't like small rooms. He wanted horizon. We argued. He said, sign or you're out. I said, you won't sign me, you'll erase me. He laughed. Then you cut his throat, Natalie said, because sometimes you say the sentence for the room, so the room stops pretending it doesn't know. Single pass, left to right across his anterior neck. You're left-handed. You have a triangular sailing scar on your left thumb. We lifted a partial left thumb with that scar from the stair bar and the maintenance hatch lip. You taped the e-stop. You taped the squeegee blade and pulled rinse across the deck while the room turned just enough to make the arcs forget the straight line you were making. He stared at her. The air at the edges of his eyes went damp but not yet human. I didn't plan to. He swallowed and looked at his phone as if it could wring him out of this. He grabbed at me. His nail, it hurt. It got under. He glanced at his thumb, as if expecting a ribbon of tape to grow back. You knew the stair camera's blind window, she went on. You came down at 8 hours 58 minutes and 34 seconds. You left at 9 hours 3 minutes and 10 seconds. You timed your moves to the flare you'd rehearsed watching from your expensive view. The reflectors took that metronome away tonight. You walked to the door anyway. Bodies remember choreography. Felix sat very still. When he spoke, it was like he'd found a version of a story he could tolerate hearing in his own mouth. He built our fund on movement, he said. Always in motion, always a step ahead. You stand still and they change the picture and call you obsolete. I thought if the room moved for me, if the city moved for me, the rest would follow. Buildings don't keep promises, Natalie said. People do, or don't. His laugh was small and full of keys to rooms he no longer owned. It was tidy in my head, he said. Light and tide and a slow rotation and a conversation. Then he said the wrong sentence and I said the wrong sentence, and the knife was already in my hand because I'd cut the tape. It was so easy. He pinched his eyes shut. I thought I could wash it down. I thought the movement would take it away. Movement doesn't take things away, Natalie said. It relocates them until someone cares to look. He opened his eyes, and they were the eyes of a man who had run out of rehearsals. If I say I didn't mean to kill him, do you write that down? I write down what is true in words, she said. The rest shows itself in torque curves and salt and grooves and the way blood arcs when a floor turns under it. She signaled, and Rafi stepped in with 2 officers, the irony not lost on anyone. Rafi's mouth was a thin line. He had decided, perhaps, to choose the version of himself that didn't reach for loopbacks while rooms moved in full view. They cuffed Felix with the ordinary ceremony the city reserves for men who believed they didn't have to learn ordinary endings. As they led him out, he turned once, ridiculous with hope. If the floor hadn't moved, he said, would he have died? Natalie thought of the chalk dot, of the swallow, of the quiet way a ring can make a city feel like it's decided to love you back for a minute. You brought the blade, she said. The room only brought you cover. When the door closed, Wei exhaled through his nose, a mechanic's prayer spent. Hannah slid the last adhesive comparison across. A stamp without a stamp. Co-texted, blade channel residue equals blood trace plus moly. Adhesive blend on e-stop/squeegee/nail matches with intolerance. The circle of proof was not art, but it had a kind of geometry all the same. Arun stood in the hall with a face full of mistakes and survival. I didn't mean, I never. You built a bridge, Natalie said. He crossed it. Arun nodded like a penitent who understood he would spend the rest of his contract writing safer code. Rafi stared past them to the hatch, where a tamper strip reflected nothing now but hallway light. May, from the terrace door, watched the bay practice its forever. Finance, ego, and a left-handed grip converge. Felix's debt supplied the motive. His box cutter and taped e-stop supplied the method. Next, bind his thumb to the tape and his prints to the hatch. Tie the hand to the panel he should never have touched. Part 9, the left-handed tape. The small things would close it. Natalie liked cases that ended with a click you could feel in your bones. No flourish, just the right tooth finding the right notch. Co called her down to the lab at 7:10 with a voice that had the polite lift she saved for gifts. On the light table waited 3 transparencies. The e-stop tape segment, the swab tape from the stair push bar, and a gel lift from the maintenance hatch lip. Beside them, a photograph of a left thumb taken at booking Felix's, its distal ridge field interrupted by a triangular sail of scar tissue. We have partial ridge matches across all 3, Co said, tapping the overlays one by one. Not fulls, you don't get those on film, but enough ridge endings and bifurcations to meet the standard when combined. The triangular scar intrudes in the same sector on each lift. It's like a watermark. Add in the sweat composition on the squeegee handle, urea and chloride levels consistent with the same donor, and your thumb, detective, is going to be very busy in court. Natalie studied the overlays. The scar did most of the talking. A little absence where the fingerprints' music paused and then resumed. It was an identity in negative. Adhesive blend? She asked. Resolved, Co said. The e-stop seam, the squeegee edge, and the filament from under Damien's thumbnail are a statistical match for the same brand line. Crystal clear office film, lot characteristics consistent with stock sold by your local chain. The solvent residues, delimonene plus a trace of methyl salicylate, match the chain's house label remover. It's not a fingerprint, but it's a very particular smudge. Your receipt at 7:42 fits the chemistry's watch. Good, Natalie said. Make it a picture the jury can't unsee. Upstairs, Hannah had security's confession drawn in diagrams. On the left screen, the 859 maintenance VPN handshake signature. On the right, the 1858 signature during the trial rotation. Same device ID, same mobile OS build, same MDM profile. Security, Halim, Mobile 03. The logger showed the loopback toggle attempts like small stutters in an otherwise honest line. Rafi sat across the table with a weariness that had finally decided to be useful. He had shaved too closely for a man who used to keep the building's lies presentable. I obstructed computer records, he said, eyes on the diagram rather than on Natalie. I spoofed encoder status to keep the public-facing log quiet. I thought it was a demo and I didn't want a press call to start before facilities could write a statement that didn't sound like panic. I did not know Felix was going to cut anyone. You knew the maintenance port was being used, Natalie said. You knew the supervisor was looped. I suspected. He corrected in that precise way security men adopt when they're trying to get their charge counts arranged into something survivable. And once you suspect, it's easier to be complicit than to be brave. I'll sign the statement. Who told you how to quiet the supervisor feed? Natalie asked. He grimaced. No one needs to tell you something you've seen before. Engineers loop their own alarms in tests all the time. You learn the shape of the trick even if you don't learn the words. Your prints are on the loopback dongle, Hannah added, not unkindly. Right index and middle handling grip. Not on the blade. Not on the tape. Your guilt lives where you're pointing. He nodded. A man drawing a boundary around his sin so it did not eat the rest of him. Arun stood in the doorway like a student waiting to retake an exam he'd already failed once. He had brought his tool roll without being asked, a secular offering. Natalie gestured him in. You installed the Shadow PLC, she said. You trimmed a notch. You tied into the CAN bus. You used cheap ties behind acoustic panels. You did it for an artist's pitch and because you love machines more than memos. He swallowed. Yes. You did not write the scheduler. You did not tape an e-stop. You did not hold a blade. No, he said. I wouldn't. He broke off and changed tenses. I didn't. Your Allen keys burr prints the same nick on the Shadow PLC's lower screw as we found under the hatch, she said. Own that, and I can keep you in the realm of negligence and unauthorized modification, not conspiracy to murder. He nodded, grateful for a map with fewer cliffs. Jody badgered me, he added, because truth, once it starts, tends to tumble. She wanted the ring to breathe. She said a still circle is a curse. I said I could make a sandbox. I said I'd remove it before it mattered. Jody didn't write the scheduler either, Natalie said. Her initials were a costume someone else put on the code. Arun blinked. Felix. We're not assigning authorship on assumption, Natalie said. We're going to pull the micro PLC's last configuration hash and the SD card's file history. People leave the dates they deserve. They did. The micro PLC's mounted card coughed up its little archaeology. A text export of the routine compiled 48 hours earlier on a laptop whose hostname resolved, via DHCP logs from the tower's guest network, to Felix O'Air. There were no handwritten signatures, only those you forget machines keep for you. The author_tagline, Helix 33/JL, was present in the source and the compiled block. A flourish you add when you think monograms still absolve you. Felix can claim a contractor touched his machine, Hannah said, anticipating defenses the way she anticipated glare. But we have him on the SD right, and we have the whitelist containing his own ID and Damien's, and we have his purchase at 742, and we have his stair times hugging the wound window. Bundle it, Natalie said. Everything small together until it's large. Co-pinged again. You wanted the squeegee handle sweat profiled, her message read. YSTR consistent with Felix's sample. Not exclusionary by itself, but in context, another weight. Natalie looked at the board and the case rearranged itself to its final composition. The rotation was the misdirection. The tape and blade were the act. Rafi pushed the lie along the wire. Arun made the wire available. Felix played conductor with a metronome of glare and tide. The city contributed its daily physics, innocent and exact. She took a last walk to level 33 because endings deserve the dignity of seeing their stage one more time. The tamper seal on the e-stop guard was new. The plastic winked a small, honest light. The chalk dot near the swallow decal had been wiped by housekeeping. A little ghost remained that only someone who knew where to look would notice. May stood by the glass, hands folded, watching the afternoon tide change its mind. You have your murderer, she said without looking at Natalie. I do, Natalie said. And the circle? It still wants to move, Natalie said. But we'll lock it for a while. May's smile was almost fond. Locking circles only teaches them about keys. I'm collecting keys, Natalie said. She turned to go and then paused by the maintenance hatch. She pressed her own left thumb lightly against the lip, not to leave a print, but to feel the radius that had guided another thumb with a triangular scar. Habit had made a choreography. Chemistry had made it legible. Light had made the gaps. The small things clicked. When she reached the control room, she signed the charge sheet summaries and handed them to the sergeant like whether she had decided not to argue with. Add obstruction and computer misuse for Rafi, she said. Add unauthorized modification and endangerment for Arun. Jody and May get their fines. Felix book for murder, tampering with safety systems, and data offenses. The sergeant nodded. The printer sang its thin office hymn. Papers slid out that would become a day in court and then a number of years. Before she left, Natalie looked again at the micro PLC's code on Way's screen. The author_tagline with its JL sat there like a childish flourish on a forged check. She highlighted it and let her finger hover. Leave it, she said. It helps to remember that cleverness is often just a costume. Wei closed the laptop. The hatch closed with a clean, official sound. Somewhere in the city, a man with a triangular scar on his left thumb stared at a wall that would not move for him anymore. The tape told the thumb told the scar told the hand. With the helpers charged and Felix anchored to his own tools and logs, only the uncanny remains. Why the hour felt chosen and how the sky became an accomplice. Part 10, The Uncanny Twist. In the morning, the city looked freshly laundered. A sky you could eat with a spoon. Natalie took her coffee standing at the level 32 window and watched the bay clock flex its mirrored fins. The fins answered the sun like a choir, each on its own schedule, each willing to bless or blind depending on where you stood. Timing there was not magic. It was math, predictable enough to sell to tourists as moods. Wei arrived with a printout and a look that said the machine had told one last secret. We dug deeper into the scheduler's arm condition, he said. It's not just 2 on the white list within 10 minutes. It's which readers they're seen by. He set the sheet down. A simple table. Antennas, reader IDs, acceptance logic. L33, lift, ARR. L33, stair, ante. L33, terrace, door. Any 2 pings among the 4 readers would count. Except, Wei said, tapping a line, we have a presence ping at 8:52 annotated DKOH at L33, lift, ARR. Damien hadn't badged into the building yet. So how does Damien's ghost walk into 33 minutes before he's in the lift? Natalie asked. Not a clone badge in the classic sense, Hannah said from the doorway, eyes bright with the happiness of a solved riddle. An NFC relay. Felix's phone ran a relay app that echoed another device's tap. He stood at the ground floor coffee stand at 8:51, right behind Damien while Damien used the building wallet to pay. The stand's reader is integrated with the same back-end that services the tower's presence network. The app captured Damien's UID as it went past and replayed it on 33's lift arrival antenna via a little relay coil hidden in a planter near the doors. We found the coil epoxied to a metal frame. Glue blend matches his apartment. Wei slid over a phone photo. The base of a planter by the level 33 lift lobby. A wire like a black hair disappearing into a seam. A nudge coil, he said. Close enough to the reader's field. It might make the system hear what it wants to hear. Damien's coffee became Damien's presence, Natalie said. Felix manufactured the second ping himself. Exactly, Hannah said. At 8:52, the system thinks Damien is on 33. At 8:57, Felix arrives for real on 35. Within 10 minutes, the whitelist condition is satisfied. The scheduler arms and waits for 9 o'clock. Why not just wait for the real Damien? Wei asked, genuinely puzzled. Because he wanted certainty, Natalie said. And because he wanted the metronome he'd chosen. She brought up the glare model. A simple plot built from the city's public reflectance data. The tide clock peaked at 9 o'clock on this particular Tuesday, high tide plus sun at the right azimuth, and through a blade that kissed level 33 south camera every 40 seconds for 7 minutes. The curve was as pretty as a lie. Felix picked the day the Bay agreed with him, she said. He didn't just arm a room. He armed the sky. Hannah flipped to a map of app telemetry Felix hadn't meant to share with anyone. Background location pings, Bluetooth handshakes. His phone spoke to the planter coil at 8:52, she said. It spoke again at 8:58 outside the stair door on 35. Then it went quiet for 3 minutes, airplane mode or a Faraday sleeve, right while the cut and rinse would have happened. It wakes at 9:04. If you're a man who thinks logs are how truth gets born, you put your phone to sleep while you're making a new kind of truth. Natalie looked at the table again, the tidy if present condition, the childish monogram in the code, the looped supervisor feed humming lullabies while the maintenance port did the adult work. She felt the case click like a ring gear seating on a pinion. The uncanny at 9 o'clock was choreography. A ghost presence, a coil in a planter, a tide clock, and a floor that had been told to behave. The view marks in the glass, she said. Remembering the chalk. Stubborn return to itself didn't prove a miracle. They proved fidelity. Wei gave a small, relieved laugh that sounded like an apology to the building. For once, the machine didn't lie, he said. We told it to forget. Didn't. The decals remembered. Natalie had Rafi brought up. He looked smaller today, or maybe just exact. She set the planter coil on the table in an evidence bag like a small black punctuation mark. You keep doors loyal, she said. Yesterday you kept a lie loyal, too. Did you see this in your house? Rafi looked at the coil for a long beat. Then he nodded once. I suspected something like it, he said. I didn't go looking because if you name a ghost, you own it. I'm naming it now. You'll write that, Natalie said. And the part where you touched the loopback because panic without logs looks worse than panic with them. He exhaled. I'll write it. She sent him away and rang for May. The consultant stood in the doorway as if levels had their own weather and she preferred standing in thresholds. You said circles move when they're ignored, Natalie said. Here, a circle moved when it was asked. The asking hid inside other movement. Money, tide, a crowd at coffee. May's eyes didn't leave the planter coil. A circle that never moves invites longing, she said. Longing moves people. You have the man who mistook choreography for fate. I do, Natalie said, but I wanted the city to stop feeling haunted. The city is a mirror, May said. When it flashes, it's because someone put a fin there. By noon, the arrest warrant was ready in the grown-up way these things get ready. Paperwork with corners, signatures that carry consequences. Natalie walked herself through every piece one last time. A ritual in place of incense. Torque logs. 8:59 to 9:08 maintenance port current rise. 0.70 revolutions per minute. BMS silence. Supervisor looped. Maintenance only logging. Shadow PLC. Scheduler to rotate at 9 o'clock if whitelist seen. Author _egg. Helix 33/JL. Compiled and written from Felix O'Air. SD card file history timestamped. Whitelist spoof. NFC relay coil planted near L33 lift arrival. D.KOH presence at 8:52. Felix nearby. Damien not yet badged. Glare model. Tide clock peak reflectance at 9 o'clock. 40-second blind windows. Felix rehearsed. Trial rotation removed glare and showed his drift to the door anyway. Forensics. Rotating substrate spatter bias. Baywater plus detergent rinse. Teak microslivers fresh cut. Moly on cuff and in Felix's apartment rag. Squeegee sweat YSTR consistent. Adhesive blend match e-stop/squeegee/nail. Delimonene plus methyl salicylate residues. Left thumb. Partials with triangular scar on e-stop film. Stair bar. Hatch lip. Witness. Neighbor hears sign or you're out at 8:59. Stair cadence aligns with door cycles. None of it was supernatural. All of it felt in the body. Like the moment the ferry leaves the dock and your balance argues with your eyes. That was the trick. Leverage a sensation most people can't name and ask it to be your accomplice. She sent 2 cars. Felix answered his door with a face that had spent the night becoming an explanation. When he saw the warrant, he let it go, relief and ruin arriving together. He put his hands out with the solemnity of a man who has decided to be orderly about his own undoing. Tell me something, he said on the way out, voice quiet enough to pass for a secret. If I hadn't set the coil, if the glare didn't land, if the ring didn't turn, would the city feel different to you? It would feel the same, Natalie said. The only thing that would be different is Damien. He looked away. The tide clock flashed, indifferent and exact. As they put him in the car, a commuter on the promenade pointed at Helix Tower and told a friend a story about the day the floor turned. The friend laughed the way people laugh when they'd like to be brave about physics. The chalk dot was gone. The swallow decal still kept birds from dying of glass. Natalie walked back in through the staff entrance and let herself listen once more at the maintenance hatch. Machines keep a last whisper when you've made them honest. This one just hummed in its box like a thing that had been reassured. You will be asked for the truth and you will tell it. Part 11, Arrests and Statements. By afternoon, the city's paperwork had a pulse. Charges aligned like teeth in a gear. and everyone's version of the truth found its box. They brought Felix to interview 2, the sober room with the table that reflects a person back at half opacity. He sat, hands folded, the triangular scar on his left thumb looking suddenly ceremonial. His lawyer watched the glass as if it might turn into something useful. Natalie pushed a single folder forward. "We'll go orderly," she said. "Murder, tampering with a safety system, computer misuse and data interference." He nodded once, as if he'd expected different nouns and was relieved by the familiar ones. "I want to speak," he said. "On record." The recorder clicked. He didn't bother with throat clearing. "I wrote the scheduler," Felix said. "I borrowed a routine from an open source block and edited in the whitelist and the time. I put JL because I thought it was funny, and because if anyone ever found it, I wanted them to go shout at the artist first. I copied to the micro PLC's card from my laptop in my unit. Yes, the 1-year logs say. I set the relay coil in the planter to echo Damien's wallet tap. I watched the glare model and picked Tuesday. At 8:58, I took the internal stair. At approximately 9:01 on the terrace, we argued. I had a cutter because I had just taped the e-stop. When he grabbed me, he stopped, pinched his eyes, then squared himself with the bland mercy of confession. I cut him. One motion. I rinsed. I timed the rinse with the glare. I left by the stair. I changed the blade at home. I wiped the handle. I didn't plan to kill him until I did. The lawyer's hand hovered, then dropped. "We'll talk about intent," he said faintly. "We will," Natalie agreed. "But the physics doesn't care about your adjectives." He signed his statement with a firm hand that shook only at the loop of his surname. When they took him to holding, he did not look back. Rafi's statement came next in a controlled monotone, like a man testifying to whether he'd been paid to improve. "I connected via maintenance VPN at 8:59 and again at 18:58, he read. "I toggled a loopback on the encoder feed during both sessions to suppress rotation status on the supervisory layer, believing, wrongly, that I was preventing public panic during what I thought was an unauthorized demo. I did not participate in or know of a plan to harm anyone. I recognize this constitutes obstruction and misuse of systems. I will cooperate with the investigation." "Who showed you the loopback trick?" Natalie asked when the formal words were done. "No one," he said, finally letting his eyes meet hers. "You clean up enough tests and you learn where the dust will fall. I wanted clean. I made it dirty." He signed. His penmanship was neat and defensive. Arun sat with his tool roll on his lap like a child clutching a favorite book in a principal's office. He spoke without prompting, lightly hoarse, the words of a man who had tried saying them to himself first. "I installed the CAN bridge that let the micro PLC talk to the inverters," he said. "I cut the notch. I used the cheap ties. I told Jody to stop pestering, then told her too much anyway. I thought I was building a sandbox. I didn't imagine." He ran out of breath and borrowed more. "I didn't write the scheduler. I didn't touch the e-stop. I didn't move the floor at 9. I didn't know anyone would be hurt." "Your Allen key?" Natalie prompted. He nodded. "Mine. The burr marks the screw. That's on me." Wei submitted a parallel statement, terse and engineer clean. Discovery of anomalies, preservation of logs, isolation protocols observed. For the avoidance of doubt, he wrote at the end, "Level 33 rotation hardware is to be decommissioned pending structural audit. Shadow interfaces removed. Supervisory parity with maintenance channels enforced hereafter." It read like a vow. Jody and May came in not as suspects but as people who had orbited too close to a bad star. "I argued for motion," Jody said. Her camera left at home like a disarmed limb. "I didn't code your scheduler. I didn't ask anyone to lie to a building. I wanted permission and spectacle, not a murder scene. Find me for nagging an engineer. I'll pay it." "You owe me a safer brief next time," Wei said dryly from a different chair. She nodded, chastened in a way that didn't dull her. May placed her red book on the table and turned it so the elastic lay parallel to the table edge. "I advised alignment," she said. "Words have long shadows in cities. You have corrected the matter in the language you speak. That is enough." Outside the interviews, the practical world moved. The building owners' council met Natalie in the conference room, eyes already counting reputations. "We're decommissioning Level 33's rotation feature," the lawyer said. "BMS audit complete within a week. Shadow ports disallowed by contract. We'll certify and post the report." "Parity," Natalie said. "No maintenance-only channels that don't mirror to supervisor. Hardware interlocks on the e-stop that are physical, not polite. And someone signs for every panel opened." He nodded. "We're hiring a third party to crawl the whole control stack. We'll publish the crawl." Security changed the South Terrace camera housings for ones with polarizing filters. Procurement moved faster than Coral when Fear paid the invoice. The chalk dot had been scrubbed, but a discreet mark remained. This time in paint, a building's sheepish acknowledgement that humans need anchors. At the charge desk, the sergeant read back counts like a catechism. Felix Ong, 1 count of murder under section _____, 1 count tampering with safety systems, 2 counts unauthorized access and interference with computer material. Rafi Halim, 1 count unauthorized access, 1 count obstruction of justice by alteration of logs. Arun Malik, 1 count unauthorized modification of plant, 1 count endangerment by bypassing safety interlocks. Jody Lim, fine for unlicensed modifications proposal. Mei Yeo, fine for misrepresentation of services in a regulated facility. Felix's lawyer requested bail with the professional optimism of a man who keeps a necktie in his desk for all seasons. Bail was denied. The judge used measured words about risk and choreography. Back in her office, Natalie wrote the memo that would be read and excerpted by people who liked a metaphor with their compliance. Subject: Helix Tower Level 33, Rotation Incident and Homicide. Summary and recommendations. A circle makes good cover. People stare at the view while you edit the horizon. At 9 o'clock, an engineered rotation, masked from supervisory logging, coincided with a glare cycle from the bay's tide clock, producing periodic whiteouts on a critical camera. The assailant exploited both. Corrections: eliminate shadow interfaces, enforce maintenance/supervisory parity, physically secure e-stop integrity, audit NFC-adjacent systems to prevent presence spoofing, standardize camera anti-glare at known reflectance peaks. She added, because it was true and because it would be the sentence that people repeated at safety briefings. If the floor turned, it complained. Bearings do not suffer in silence. Listen to mechanisms and to the people who stand too comfortably in their blind spots. Her phone vibrated. Brief as always. All forensic packages compiled. Court ready. ****. Natalie looked out at the bay. The tide clock flashed innocently. In the glass, she saw her own outline, smaller than it felt when the room moved. She closed the file and let the building be a building again. With statements signed and the ring's misdirection dismantled, the case is ready for court. Time to close the circle and leave only the faint, useful chill. Final part: the hour the floor turned. Courtrooms have their own weather. Recycled air, fluorescent daylight, voices that travel in straight lines. The prosecution's exhibits went up like small constellations, torque curves climbing at 8:59. A maintenance log that finally had someone to listen. A micro PLC card with a file history that did not blush. Adhesive spectra that sang in harmony. A photograph of a left thumb with a triangular scar, echoed on the e-stop's film. The defense tried to name it accident, then passion, then architecture. The jury learned a new rhythm for the word proof. The verdict landed with the weight of a floor finding its stops. Guilty. Murder, tampering with a safety system, interference with computer material. Rafi took his charge of obstruction without theatrics. Arun took his own for unauthorized modification like a man accepting the invoice he wrote. Jody and May wrote their checks and left 2 quiet promises behind. 1 to ask for motion only where consent lives. 1 to stop calling inevitabilities by mystical names. Natalie filed her memo. ****, a circle makes good cover. People stare at the view while you edit the horizon. ***, it read like caution and a kind of grace. Compliance turned it into a poster. Engineers tacked it next to wiring diagrams. Security slid it between evacuation charts. It was not poetry. It was a method. Helix Tower's rotation ring locked under a removable plate, bolts torqued and stamped. The shadow interfaces were exorcised, the supervisory layer married to maintenance with rings and witnesses. The anti-bird decals were replaced without the chalk dot. Someone in housekeeping painted a tiny mark no one would notice unless they needed it. At 9 o'clock the next morning, nothing moved. The bay clock still flashed its blade and then withdrew it. In the level 33 cafe, coffee cups did not tremble. Yet everyone on that floor, barista, banker, a cleaner with her cart, felt the ghost of a glide pass under their shoes. They shifted their weight the way you do on a ferry that has already left the dock. A rumor of motion, a memory written into ankles. It faded and then stayed, the way a missing step lives forever in a stairwell. Natalie walked the ring one last time. The maintenance hatch sat flush, new tamper stripped straight as a ruler. Inside the dark, controls slept in their polite geometry. On the lip below the e-stop guard, a pinhead of moly grease held its surface tension, trembled when she breathed, and did not fall. Across the water, the tide clock flickered, indifferent as a metronome. The city kept its bargains. Light would lie when asked. Steel would tell the truth when pressed. Men would mistake choreography for fate and call it something else until someone with a notebook and a torque log told the story back to them in ordinary words. Natalie stood with her palm on the glass, a handprint that would evaporate in under a minute. She did not ask the room to move. The view was enough. Case closed. The case of a circle drawn in glass ends not with the scream of sirens, but with the sound of bearings finally still, a tower exhaling after holding its breath for too long. In the end, it was never the building that lied. It was the people who asked the steel to keep their secrets. When the circle stopped turning, truth didn't echo. It balanced. If you've stayed with us through every rotation of the story, every whispered turn of light and logic, thank you for listening, and for trusting the silence between facts. You've been listening to Somnolent Conspiracies, where architecture, obsession, and the unseen mechanics of guilt are always closer than we think. Stay tuned for the next descent into the ordinary made uncanny. And remember, when the floor moves beneath you, it may not be the world shifting. It may just be the truth finally finding its place. Subscribe, hit the bell, and leave a like if you'd like to keep turning the circle with us. Somnolent Conspiracies. Every shadow hides a story, and we'll be the ones to tell it.